What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we dive into the 2D realm of classic arcade gaming as we embark on a nostalgic journey with the X-Men Children of the Atom. Developed by Capcom during the golden age of arcade cabinets, this iconic title marked the beginning of a new era, mixing the adrenaline-pumping excitement of arcade fighting games with the superhero charm of the X-Men. Now join me as we explore the origins of X-Men Children of the Atom. After the success of the Punisher arcade game, Capcom aimed to elevate their game by assembling an even larger team to create their first Marvel licensed fighting game, with hopes of leaving a mark in the Western market. Originally, the team was offered the option between working on Street Fighter 3 or an X-Men game. Now, the decision of going with the X-Men marked a departure from traditional fighting game conventions. While most developers of the time tried to imitate Street Fighter 2, the Children of the Atom team aimed to create something unique with the Marvel license. Akira Yasuda, also known as Akiman, explained, "If you compare X-Men to Street Fighter, the X-Men are mutants with special powers, so part of what we had to consider when we were designing the game was how we could take the move system in our fighting games and express the special abilities that the X-Men have and translate them into the game." While some of the characters in the Street Fighter series could be said to have superhuman powers, for the Marvel games we did like Children of the Atom, all of the characters were defined by being mutants with superpowers, so from the get-go we decided to try and make their special moves more intense and flashy. Basically what this means is that the team was no longer bound by realistic movements or martial arts, leading to the creation of a free-form combo system where the limits felt like it was your imagination. I mean, you have characters like Storm, who could fly, Sentinel could also fly, Wolverine had a healing factor. These abilities were perfectly captured and translated into the game. Now, the game was released during the boom of the X-Men cartoon, and much of the game's success is often attributed to the cartoon popularity. However, initially the game didn't fare well in Japanese arcades. Now, Katsuya Akitomo recently revealed that X-Men Children of the Atom hit the market in 1994, but sales in Japan were so bad that describing them as poor will be an understatement. Apparently, all the US comic games prior to ours were so unprofitable that arcade operators hesitated to invest. Now, speaking of Akitomo, he was a comic translator and artist at Capcom. Yes, he was a comic translator. He was a big Marvel fan, and many credit him with influencing Capcom to chase the Marvel license by translating comics for the staff, hoping to spark interest in American comics. Now, can you imagine being part of the Capcom team during the 90s? Yeah, and having, one of your coworkers translate comics for you? That sounds really, really cool. Though both companies had worked together previously on The Punisher, this was a larger project that tested the willingness of both companies to learn and listen to each other. Capcom tried to penetrate the Western market, while Marvel tried to capture the Japanese audience. Let me remind you something, in the financial challenging 90s, Marvel was eager to collaborate with other companies to sustain its business. In English, Marvel was kinda desperate. Things were not looking good for them during the early 90s. However, with two companies harboring different philosophies, friction was obviously inevitable. One of the main sources of tensions between both companies came from the design of certain characters, particularly the Sentinel feature in this game. The Sentinel design was so different from the one seen in the TV show that apparently this was causing discontent at Marvel. Another character that deviated from the comics was Juggernaut. The team really wanted to make Juggernaut feel even more unstoppable and menacing, resulting in a larger redesign of the character that sparked tension between Capcom and Marvel. This wasn't really the first time such an incident happened between Marvel and Capcom. Something similar happened with Kingpin in the Punisher game, where Marvel requested a reduction in size, considering the Kingpin basically a mere human. I don't know if you guys remember, but the Kingpin in the Punisher game was massive. So yeah, apparently the sprite was supposed to be even bigger before Marvel had to say something like, "Hey, this is just some fat dude, no need to make him so big." Picking the right characters for the roster also caused sparks between companies. The game is loosely based in the Fatal Attraction storyline, but it also features characters from different runs. Some characters were added for the Japanese audience, such as Silver Samurai and Spiral. The game also features the voice cast from the TV show, but it all began with a failed attempt at using Japanese voice actors speaking English. Obviously, Marvel ended up rejecting most of the voice actors except for Silver Samurai. All of this happened just 2 weeks before release. So the Capcom team had to find a quick solution, leading them to work with the original cast from the X-Men cartoon in Canada to record the lines. Luckily, as the years passed, Capcom began to enjoy more freedom with their work. This is not the first X-Men game ever made, but for me, it really was the first time we saw a company capture the essence of the X-Men like this. I grew up in the 90s, playing in the arcades, to be honest with you guys, there was almost nothing like this. Really, the flashy moves, everything, the music, the sprites, it was absolutely insane. So yeah, this game was all about the presentation, boasting some impressive sprite work, fantastic music, and frenetic combat. For me, what made the game stand out was the frenetic pace. You will see the characters launch each other into the air and then do sky-high jumps to follow the action in the air. It was something new, something that wasn't done before, so it encouraged a lot of player experimentation. This game had a never-seen verticality in it. Growing up and seeing this in the arcades blew my mind, like seeing people jump high into the sky was like, it really had that wow factor. The game arcade mode consists of 8 fights, so 6 fights against the main roster and 2 fights against 2 bosses. And let me tell you something, this game is infamous for having a terrible CPU. The CPU will block everything you do. It looks pretty ridiculous in motion and leads to long fights. At the same time, this encourages very cheesy tactics to handle the game even on normal difficulty. I don't want to admit it, but I spent a lot of time learning the final boss. Yeah, you can exploit the CPU, but before we go into Magneto, let me start with Juggernaut. He's a freaking menace, thanks to his super armor and high damage on all of his attacks. He has a unique interaction with the environment in which he can pick a steel beam and use it to slap his opponent. He also has a massive range on his attacks. Now with Jugs out of the way, we finally have the final boss, Magneto. And holy moly, he's really hard. I think this is one of Capcom's most difficult fighting game final bosses. I think it's very easy to dismiss Magneto as a boss fight because we are used to seeing him as a playable character. But truth be told, this is one of the most unique fighting game boss fights ever made by Capcom. Basically, Magneto moveset is going to slowly start changing as the fight progresses. Now, for example, there is one move where he picks debris, and he can only do this move at this part of the stage. This was very immersive at the time, and this also made me realize that 30 years later, it seems that final boss fights are getting lazier. For example, I think the final boss of Mortal Kombat 1 is just Shang Tsung with Quan Chi, and then the final boss of Street Fighter 6 story mode, I think it's just JP. But speaking of Magneto, he can also become invulnerable for 10 seconds. That was very insane. Now you can reduce this timer by attacking Magneto, but knowing how predictable and aggressive the CPU is with your inputs, I think you are just better off remaining still and blocking for 10 seconds. He's also the only character in the game that can passively fill his super bar, and his super move will cause a lot of chip damage. But yeah, Magneto was freaking insane. I won't be surprised if this caused a lot of rage back in the arcade days. Now let's talk about the presentation. Presentation in this game was something else. A lot of work was spent on making the characters come to life. From Cyclops jogging to Spiral idle animation, everything had so much detail. Hell, not even later games were able to keep up with some of these games' animations, cause it looks so good. For example, Psylocke walking animation was one of the most complex animations made at the time. I like the idea that someone was such a Psylocke fan that he spent entire nights working on this. Also worth mentioning are the environments. All of them were full of life, and some of them even featured destructible, multi-level fighting environments. Colossus stage starts on a bridge. As the fight goes on, the bridge will slowly start to break up to a point where the bridge will collapse. and players will have to follow the action in a boat while sentinels fight in the background. For the 90s, the early 90s, this was absolutely insane, and let me remind you that this was running on Capcom CPS2. Like with most 2D Capcom fighting games, the Sega Saturn version was better. If you wanted to play a Capcom 2D fighting game and didn't have a friend with a Sega Saturn, then you were out of luck. I mean, I remember when I was a child, basically out of 10 kids, 6 had a PlayStation 1, 3 had a Nintendo 64, and only 1 had a Sega Saturn. So if you were not this kid or you were not friends with this kid, then I'm sorry friend, but you were out of luck. While the difference between the Saturn and the arcade version were more subtle, the difference between the arcade and the PlayStation 1 version were pretty significant, and the loading times were even longer than the Sega Saturn version. So yeah, this is a terrible way to play a fantastic game. The intro for the game was a badly rendered FMV that was even missing the sound effects, so right from the start the game is warning you about the quality of the port. Honestly, there is just no excuse for the PlayStation 1 version because it's also missing sprites and animations on the background of pretty much every stage. One of the biggest examples is on Colossus stage, where the background is lacking most details. This makes some levels feel completely lifeless. For me, the worst offender of this port is the frame rate. It pretty much runs at like 40 FPS, sometimes it even dips below 40 FPS. I'm pretty sure you can't even pull some of the combos on this version of the game. Well, these days we can fix the frame rate issues and long loading times through emulation. There is just no way to fix the missing backgrounds. The PlayStation 1 version is lacking in game modes. It's missing the survival and group battle mode from the Sega Saturn. It really is one of the worst PlayStation ports ever made. Alright boys, we're at the end of the video. I think this is a game that most people weren't really able to digest during release. Reviewers at the time, you know, they say mostly positive things about the game, but I'm sure most of them weren't really able to dig onto what made this game so good. And honestly, I can't blame them, because even to this day, we still have people discovering new combos with these games. And yes, 30 years later, people still play this game. And this game series just refuses to die, because Capcom recently announced a Marvel vs. Capcom collection. So we're so back. This is just going to open the door for a new generation to discover all the Marvel vs. Capcom games. And who knows, maybe in the future we also get a new Marvel vs. Capcom game. So things are looking definitely really good for Marvel vs. Capcom fans. And yeah, that's pretty much it. As always guys, thanks for being here, thanks for watching, and I hope all of you have a great rest of your day. Take care amigos.